Elijah Carter never wanted to come back to Marion, Alabama. He told himself that he had left this town in the past, that he had built a new life, that nothing, not the ghosts, not the memories, not the unfinished business, could pull him back. But then his father died, and suddenly there was no choice. The funeral was small, a handful of people, most of them faces he barely recognized. Some old church friends, a few distant relatives. The air was thick with humidity, with silence, with the weight of words left unspoken. And as Elijah stood by the grave staring at the fresh dirt, he felt the town watching him. And not just the people, the town itself, like it remembered him, like it never forgot. That night he stayed in his father's house, the house where he grew up, where he learned to keep quiet, where he learned that some doors should never be opened. The walls still held whispers. The floor still creaked under footsteps that weren't his. And at exactly 2:37 a.m., the phone rang. An old landline, one that had been disconnected years ago. Elijah didn't answer. He didn't have to, because he already knew what the voice on the other end would say. The next morning he went into town. The same streets, the same buildings. But the people, they didn't look at him like he was one of them. Not anymore. Not since he left. A few nodded. A few whispered. But most just stared. Because Elijah Carter was supposed to be gone. And people like him, they weren't supposed to come back. The diner was exactly the same. Same booths. Same faded menu. Same white men sitting at the counter pretending not to notice him. He ordered coffee, sat in the back, and then, from behind him, a voice. Isn't familiar. You should have stayed gone. Elijah didn't flinch, didn't turn, just sipped his coffee, slow, careful, and then he said, "And why y'all called me last night?" Silence. Then a chair scraped across the floor, and someone sat across from him. Sheriff Lucas Tate. Same uniform, same badge, same dead eyes. He leaned forward, hands folded on the table. "You don't belong here anymore, Carter." Elijah smiled, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't. "I buried my father yesterday," he said. "Of a crime now?" The sheriff didn't blink, but his fingers twitched, like he wanted to reach for something, like he was remembering something. And then, "You asking the wrong questions, boy." The word hit like an old wound ripped back open. Elijah's jaw tightened. The room felt smaller, there heavier. And then, he heard it. The whisper. Not from the sheriff. Not from anyone in the diner. But from outside. From the street. Soft. Urgent. Relieved. He turned his head. And there, in the reflection of the diner window, was his father, standing on the sidewalk, staring at him, mouth moving, but no sound, just one word, over and over. "Run." Elijah's stomach dropped. He shoved back his chair, heart hammering. The sheriff didn't move, didn't even flinch, like he didn't see what Elijah saw. But he did say, "Don't do nothing stupid now." And then, as Elijah bolted out the door, the sheriff muttered, "Just like your daddy." The street was empty. No sign of his father. No footprints. No shadow. Elijah knew what he saw. And more than that, he knew what it meant. His father had never been one to speak without reason. And if he was warning Elijah to run, That meant something was coming. He didn't go back to the house. Not yet. Instead, he went to the one place that still had answers. The courthouse, where records were kept, where history was buried, and where the truth, the real truth, had been hidden for decades. The clerk didn't even try to stop him, just stared as he walked past, like he was watching a man dig his own grave. The files were deep in the archives, dust-covered, old, forgotten. Until now, Elijah found it under C. Carter, William, his father's file. But there was another one, right beneath it. Carter Elijah. His blood turned to ice. Because he had never been arrested, never had a record. So why did they have a file on him? Hands shaking, he opened it. And there, clipped to the inside cover, was a photograph. Oh, black and white. And in it, his father, standing in front of the same diner. And behind him, the sheriff. And beside the sheriff, a man, one Elijah had never seen before, until now, because it was the same man who had been sitting in the diner, the same man who had whispered for him to leave, the same man Elijah had buried yesterday. His breath hitched, his vision blurred, the room tilted, because if this photo was real, if this file was real, that meant one thing. His father had never left this town. His father had never left this building. And the man they had buried yesterday wasn't his father at all. Elijah closed the file, steeled himself, and then as he turned to leave, the courthouse doors slammed shut. The lights flickered, and a voice, low, cold, fine, spoke from the shadows. You should have stayed gone. And then, the knocking started. Boom, boom, boom. Elijah Carter wasn't supposed to come back. But now, he wasn't supposed to leave. Elijah Carter should have left. He should have taken his car, driven to the nearest highway, and never looked back at Marion, Alabama. But he didn't, because his father's voice was still in his head, telling him to run. And if his father was warning him, then something was coming. The courthouse was dead silent. The lights still flickered. The air was thick, charged with something Elijah didn't want to name. And the knocking. Boom. 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 It wasn't coming from the doors. It was coming from the walls. Like something was inside them. Like something was trying to get out. Elijah forced himself to move, forced himself to breathe, because he knew he had just found something he wasn't supposed to, and now the town was going to make sure he never left. He ran, out of the archives, to the hall, past the clerk who didn't even look up, like she already knew how this would end. And as he shoved open the doors, the night swallowed him whole. The street was empty, too empty, like everyone already knew to stay inside, like they knew Elijah was on borrowed time. He took off down the sidewalk, breath sharp in his chest. He needed to get to the house, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't have a choice. His father had left him breadcrumbs, and now Elijah had no choice but to follow them. The drive was a blur, streetlights flickering overhead, buildings passing in streaks of dark and gray, and in his rearview mirror, the diner, the same place where the sheriff had sat across from him, where the whisperers had told him to leave, where his father's reflection had stared at him from the glass. Only now, the lights inside the diner were off, and the booths were full of people who shouldn't be there, sitting too still, staring straight ahead, mouths open but silent, like they were waiting for something or someone. And then one of them turned their head and smiled. Elijah's foot hit the gas. The car roared forward, faster, faster, because he knew if he stopped now, he wouldn't leave at all. The house was waiting, just like he left it. Dark, quiet, wrong. Elijah killed the engine, hands still tight on the wheel. For a second, he thought about driving away, leaving the past buried. But then, the front door opened by itself, and Elijah knew it was time. Inside, nothing had changed. The air was thick, still, like the house had been holding its breath since the moment he left. And in the kitchen, the landline phone sat on the wall, silent, dead, until it rang. Barari. Elijah froze, heart hammering, because he already knew whoever was on the other end was waiting for him. His fingers closed around the receiver. Slow, careful, he lifted it to his ear. Didn't speak, didn't breathe, just listened. And then, a voice. His father's voice, but not how he remembered it. Not warm, not strong, just a whisper. They never let me leave. Elijah's stomach twisted. Who? He asked. Silas. Then, the voice again. They buried me before I was dead. A chill crawled up Elijah's spine. His father's grave. Had they buried a stranger? Or had they buried his father alive? The thought made his breath hitch. His hand clenched around the phone. Dad, where are you? A pause. And then, right behind you, Elijah spun and saw him, or what was left of him, standing in the kitchen, face hollow, eyes dark, body thin, too thin, like something had been eating him away from the inside out.
But it was his father. It was him, and then his father's mouth opened. But it wasn't his father's voice anymore. It was something else.
Something old, something hungry. And it said, "They're coming for you next." Elijah didn't run.
Didn't speak.
Because suddenly, there were footsteps on the porch, a shadow moving past the window, and then, boom, 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 the knocking. The same knocking he heard in the courthouse, in the walls, and now, at his door. Elijah stepped back, heart pounding. His father didn't move. He didn't even blink, just stared. "Who are they?" Elijah asked.
And this time, his father's voice was his own again. Low, sharp, final, the ones who buried me. The knocking grew louder. And then, from outside, a voice, the sheriff, calm, unbothered, like he had all the time in the world. "You know too much, Carter." Elijah's pulse spiked, because he finally understood. His father hadn't just died, hadn't just disappeared. The town had done something to him. And now they were coming for Elijah, too. The lights flickered. The windows rattled. The house groaned like something alive. And in the darkness, his father whispered one last time, "They buried me before I was dead." Then his father's body collapsed into dust. Gone. Like he had never been there at all. The front door shook. "Open the door, Elijah." The sheriff's voice. Smooth. Casual. Like this was just another conversation. Like Elijah hadn't just watched his father turn to ash, but Elijah wasn't a kid anymore. wasn't the same scared boy who had run away from this town. This time, it wasn't running. He grabbed the shotgun from above the fireplace, loaded it, took a deep breath, because if this town had buried his father alive, Elijah Carter was going to dig up every last secret and burn Marion, Alabama to the ground. Outside, the knocking stopped, and in the silence, the sheriff chuckled. "You got your daddy's fire, boy." I paused. Then, soft, "Certain. Let's see if you last longer." And then, the lights went out, and the fight for Elijah Carter's life began.
I was 7 years old the first time I was called a racial slur. I didn't understand it at first, didn't know why the words stung, why my mother's face tightened when I repeated them at home, why my father clenched his jaw and told me never to say it again. But I knew from the way the boys on the playground laughed, the way they smirked, like they had said something powerful, that it was meant to hurt me. By the time I was 12, I had learned the quiet rules, the ones that no one wrote down but everyone like me knew. I learned that if I went into a store alone, I needed to keep my hands in plain sight, that if a cop ever stopped me, I had to answer yes sir, no sir. That when I walked through certain neighborhoods, I had to keep my hood down, my eyes forward, my body small. But knowing the rules didn't mean I was safe. One summer afternoon, my father took me fishing, just the two of us. We drove down to a lake outside of town, a place he had gone to when he was a boy. The water was still, the sky was open. It felt peaceful. We sat on the bank, our lines in the water, the silence between us comfortable, until the truck pulled up. Two men climbed out, their faces unreadable, their eyes sharp. I felt the tension shift in the air, felt my father's entire body go still. "You boys lost?" one of them asked. My father shook his head. "Just fishing." The man spit into the dirt. "This ain't your place." My stomach tightened, but my father stayed calm. "Didn't see any signs." The second man stepped closer. "Don't need signs to know where you don't belong." For a second, just a second, I thought my father would stand up, thought he would tell them we had every right to be there, but instead he reached over, reeled in his line, stood up. "Come on," he said to me, his voice quiet. "Let's go." I didn't understand. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that we hadn't done anything wrong, but my father's grip on my arm told me to stay silent. We packed up our things, got in the car, drove away, and as we pulled out onto the road, I glanced back and saw the men still standing there watching us, grinning like they had won. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream, but my father just drove his hands, gripping the wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. That night I asked him why we left, why he didn't say something, why he didn't fight back. He sighed, ran a hand over his face. "Because I wanted to come home." I didn't understand then, but I did later when I was 16 when it happened to me. I was walking home from a friend's house late, just a few blocks away from my street, when I heard the sirens, saw the flashing lights. My body went cold before the cop even stepped out of the car. "Where are you headed?" I swallowed. "Home." "You live around here?" I nodded, gave him my address. He looked at me like he didn't believe me. "You match the description of someone we're looking for?" I knew better than to ask what description. I knew better than to argue. I knew better than to do anything but nod and keep my hands where he could see them. He patted me down, checked my ID, held on to it longer than necessary, then finally let me go. As I walked away, he called after me, "Be careful out here. Be careful." Like I was the problem. I got home shaking. My father was waiting at the door. He didn't ask what happened, he just nodded. By the time I was in college, I had stopped expecting things to be different. I had stopped expecting that if I was smart enough, if I worked hard enough, if I was polite enough, that people would see me for who I was instead of what I was. Because no matter where I went, it followed me. At school, professors assumed I was an athlete before a student. Classmates hesitated before saying my name. The security guards at the library always seemed to check my ID twice. At stores, employees watched me as if I was planning to steal something, even when my hands were empty. At work, my ideas were ignored until a white colleague repeated them, and suddenly they were genius. It didn't matter what I did, how careful I was, how many degrees I earned, how successful I became. Because every time I stepped into a room, I was reminded that the rules weren't made for me. One night I went to dinner with some coworkers, a nice restaurant downtown. We were celebrating a promotion, not mine but a friend's. We laughed, we ordered drinks, we enjoyed the night, until I got up to use the restroom. On my way back, I saw a woman clutch her purse tighter as I walked past her, eyes darting nervously to her husband. I saw a waiter glance at me, then quickly look away. I sat back down, tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. Because no matter what I did, no matter how far I went, no matter how much I achieved, the world always found a way to remind me that to them I would always be something to fear, something to watch, something that didn't belong. That was the night I stopped caring about making them comfortable. That was the night I stopped shrinking myself for their approval. Because I realized that I could follow every rule, do everything right, be everything they said I should be, and it still wouldn't be enough. Because the problem was never me. It was them. I used to think that knowing the truth would make it easier. That once I understood the rules, once I saw the world for what it really was, I would be able to navigate it without feeling that deep, sinking weight in my chest. But knowing the truth didn't make it easier. It just made it impossible to ignore. After college, I landed a job in marketing at a firm downtown. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a step in the right direction. I walked into that office on my first day wearing my best suit, my head held high, telling myself that this time would be different. That here, in a place built on numbers and strategy, I would be judged on my work. But racism doesn't disappear. It just learns how to dress better. The first week I noticed the way my manager introduced me in meetings. "This is our new hire, really sharp, part of our diversity push." Diversity push? Like I was a box they had checked off. Like my presence here was a favor. I smiled, shook hands, and swallowed the anger that was already burning in my gut. At first, I kept my head down, did my work, played the game, but no matter how hard I tried, I could feel it. The subtle ways they made it clear that I was an outsider. The way my ideas were ignored in meetings only to be praised when a white colleague repeated them. The way I was always given the urban accounts, as if that was the only market I could understand. The way some people looked at me when I walked into a room, like they were wondering if I had really earned my place or if someone had handed it to me to fill a quota. I worked harder, stayed later, made sure that every project I touched was flawless. But no matter what I did, I was always one step behind. Then came the client dinner. One of our biggest clients had flown in from out of state, and my manager invited me to join the dinner. My first time at the table with the senior team. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt like I was being tested. The restaurant was expensive, dimly lit, filled with the hum of money and power. I took my seat, ordered a drink, kept my posture straight, my tone measured. I was careful. But no matter how careful I was, it didn't matter. Halfway through the meal, the client leaned toward me, smiling too wide. "So," he said, "where are you really from?" I clenched my jaw. "Chicago." He laughed. "No, I mean originally. You've got that look, you know." I glanced at my manager, waiting for him to say something, to shift the conversation. He just sipped his wine, looking amused. "Born and raised in Chicago," I said again, my voice flat. The client chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, I swear, you people always have the best stories. You people." I felt the heat rise in my chest, my hands tightening into fists beneath the table. But I had learned this lesson before. I knew how this played out. If I got angry, I was the problem. If I called it out, I was making things uncomfortable. If I pushed back, I was difficult. So I swallowed it down, forced a laugh, and let the conversation move on. That night, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, replaying the moment over and over. I had done everything right. I had played by the rules. And it still wasn't enough. The breaking point came a few months later. A promotion opened up, one that I had worked for, one that I had earned. I had the best performance reviews, the highest client retention rate. I was the obvious choice. But when the announcement was made, my name wasn't the one they called. It was a white colleague who had been there half as long as I had, whose numbers weren't as strong, who had come to me for help more times than I could count. I sat in that meeting, my hands gripping the arms of my chair, listening to my manager talk about how we just felt he was the right fit for leadership. Right fit. That phrase that had followed me since I was a kid. That polite way of saying, "not you." That night I wrote my resignation letter. But I didn't send it. Instead, I sent an email, a long one. I detailed everything, the comments, the exclusions, the promotions that went to less qualified people, the diversity push that never actually led to real inclusion. I pressed send. The fallout was immediate. Some people avoided me entirely. Some told me they admired me but were afraid to say anything themselves. HR sent me an email about how they took these concerns seriously, but nothing changed. A few weeks later, I walked out of that building for the last time. But I didn't walk away empty-handed. I took every lesson, every scar, every quiet injustice, and I turned them into something else. I started writing about it, talking about it, making sure people saw what I had seen. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. For the first time, I realized that the goal had never been to fit into their world. The goal was to build my own. James Holloway had lived in Elmwood, Georgia all his life. It was the kind of town where people smiled at you in the grocery store, but whispered about you behind closed doors if you didn't fit the mold. He had learned that young, growing up as one of the few black kids in a predominantly white town. But as he got older, he tried not to let it bother him. He studied hard, got a scholarship, and became a lawyer. He wanted to make a difference, to fight the battles that his father and grandfather had warned him about. Now he was back. Not by choice, but because his mother needed him. She had fallen ill, and though she would never say it, he knew she needed someone to take care of her. So James packed his life into a suitcase and returned to the town he had spent years trying to forget. It didn't take long for the old feeling to creep back in. The second he stepped into a gas station on the outskirts of town, the cashier, a man in his 40s with thinning blonde hair, gave him that look, the look James had seen too many times to count. Suspicion wrapped in politeness. "You just passing through?" the man asked, scanning the pack of gum James had set on the counter. "No," James said evenly. "I'm moving back. Family reasons." The cashier nodded slowly, but the smile never reached his eyes. "Welcome home." James didn't need to be a lawyer to know what the man really meant. By the time he pulled into his mother's driveway, the sky had darkened and the cicadas had started their endless summer song. The house was just as he remembered. Small but warm, with a porch swing that creaked when the wind blew just right. His mother, Dolores, was waiting at the door. She had aged since he last saw her, the years carved into her face, but she still had the same sharp gaze. "James," she said, pulling him into a tight hug, "you didn't have to come all this way." "You know I did," he replied, kissing her cheek. She sighed but didn't argue. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old books. His mother had always kept it neat, even when she wasn't feeling her best. As he set his bags down, she watched him carefully. "You're staying for a while?" "As long as you need me," he said. She nodded, but there was something in her eyes, something cautious. James soon realized why. The next morning, he drove into town to pick up some groceries. As he walked through the aisles of Carter's Market, he felt it again. The stares, the whispers. An older woman clutched her purse a little tighter when he walked past. A young man in a ball cap watched him from the corner of his eye. James exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Some things never changed. At the register, a teenage cashier rang up his groceries. She seemed friendly enough, until her gaze flickered to something behind him and her smile faded. James turned. 2 police officers stood by the entrance, watching him. His jaw tightened. He paid for his groceries and walked out, ignoring their eyes on his back. But as he reached his car, the sound of heavy boots on pavement made him stop. "Excuse me," one of the officers called out. James turned, keeping his posture relaxed. The man, Officer Langley, according to his badge, gave him a long, slow look. "We've had some reports of suspicious activity. Just making sure everything's all right." James knew the game. He had played it too many times before. "I'm just buying groceries," he said evenly. "Is that a problem?" Langley smirked. "No problem, just making sure." James stared at him for a moment before nodding. "Then have a good day." He got in his car and drove away, his hands gripping the wheel a little tighter than before. When he told his mother about it, she only sighed. "They've been like that since the day we moved here," she said. "Just waiting for a reason." James clenched his jaw. They won't get one. But he was wrong. That night, a knock at the door jolted him awake. Boom, boom, boom. He glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. His mother was asleep in the next room. He got up, heart pounding, and peered through the peephole. A police cruiser was parked outside. James opened the door. Officer Langley stood on the porch, his expression unreadable. Beside him was another officer. Stockton, a younger man James had never seen before. "Is there a problem?" James asked, crossing his arms. Langley gave him a slow smile. "Just got a call about some unusual activity near this house." James's stomach twisted. "What kind of activity?" Stockton shrugged. "Someone said they saw a man sneaking around." James exhaled sharply. "That's funny because I've been inside all night." Langley chuckled. "I'm sure you have. Mind if we take a look around?" James' fists clenched. "You got a warrant?" Langley's smile didn't waver. "Do we need one?" James took a step forward. "Yeah, you do." For a moment, the two officers just stared at him. Then Langley's smile faded. "We'll be back." James shut the door. The next day, he found a note on his windshield. "Dormant. Jets out." The message was scrawled in red marker, the letters jagged, as if written in anger. His mother saw it and shook her head. "You need to be careful, James." He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere." That night, the knocking returned. Louder. Boom, boom, boom. James sat in the dark, gripping the bat he had taken from the closet. He didn't move. The knocking continued. Then, silence. Then, a whisper. "Leave." James's breath hitched. He stood, his muscles tense, and yanked open the door. Nothing. The porch was empty. The street was still. But as he looked down, his blood ran cold. On the doormat, a bullet. James swallowed hard, his chest heaving. They weren't just trying to scare him now. They wanted him gone. And he knew if he didn't do something soon, they would make sure he never left. James Holloway hadn't slept in 2 nights. The first night, he had told himself the knocking was just some kid playing a prank. The note on his windshield, some local idiot trying to scare him. The bullet on his porch, though, that was different. That wasn't a prank. That was a warning. He didn't tell his mother about it. She was already worrying enough about him being back in Elmwood. She had warned him about the town, about the people, and she had been right. But James had never been one to run. That morning, he parked outside the police station, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He knew how this would go. He had seen it happen before, to friends, to clients, to people who thought that justice meant something in a place like this. But he had to try. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old coffee and cheap cologne. A few officers sat behind desks, laughing about something he couldn't hear. Officer Langley stood near the coffee machine, stirring his cup slowly, as if he had been expecting him. James walked up to the front desk. A woman with steel gap hair and tired eyes barely glanced up. "I need to file a report," James said. She sighed. "What's it about?" James reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling to the picture he had taken of the bullet. He placed the phone on the counter. "This was left on my porch last night." The woman blinked, looking at the screen for a moment before glancing at Langley. He was watching them now, smirking over his coffee. "You see who left it?" she asked. "No," James said, "but I know why they did." She exhaled slowly. "Mr. Holloway?" "Attorney Holloway," he corrected. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Mr. Holloway, do you have any proof this was a threat?" Jane's jaw tightened. "It's a bullet left on my property. That's not a threat to you?" "Could be a hunting accident," she said with a shrug. James let out a humorless laugh. "Right, a hunting accident that just so happened to land neatly on my welcome mat?" Langley stepped forward, sipping his coffee. "What's the problem here?" James turned to him. "The problem is that someone's trying to intimidate me, and I'd like to know what the department is going to do about it." Langley tilted his head, the smirk never leaving his face. "You sure you didn't just drop it yourself? Maybe trying to stir something up?" James clenched his fists. "You think I'd plant a bullet on my own porch?" Langley leaned in, his voice low. "I think people like you have a way of making trouble." James forced himself to stay calm. He had spent years in courtrooms keeping his temper in check when opposing counsel tried to rattle him, but this was different. He turned back to the woman at the desk. "You taking my report or not?" She hesitated, then let out another sigh. "I'll file it." James watched as she typed something into the computer. Langley took another sip of coffee. Waste of time. James ignored him and walked out. That night the knocking returned. Boom, boom, boom. James sat on the couch, his mother asleep in the next room. His heart pounded. The lights were off, but the glow of the street lamp outside cast long shadows across the walls. He gripped the bat beside him. Boomed, boomed, boomed. Louder this time. James stood, moving toward the door. He hesitated for only a second before unlocking it and yanking it open. The porch was empty, but this time there was no bullet. It was something worse. A photograph. It was a picture of his mother, taken through the living room window. James's blood turned ice cold. His hand shook as he turned the photo over. On the back, written in thick black